Hey everybody, Dave here. We are going to talk about environment variables today. In the next minute or two, I'm going to try to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about in this video so that if you're just here to quickly get the idea, you can watch 2 minutes and then, head out of here. That's totally fine with me. Let me show you what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to go into process templates. I'm going to show you where to get those process templates from Blue Prism, and then I'll show you an example of one. And then we're going to head over into the system tab. I'm going to talk about environment variables some, how you create them, how you delete them, and some concerns about making sure that you click apply when you do any of these actions, the find references and stuff like that. Then we're going to come back to Process Studio and talk about this process template a little bit, and I'm going to give you what I think is a good standard practice to add to your process templates. Add a page called something like Get Environment Variables. The purpose of this is to be a single place where you retrieve all of your environment variable data. I have 3 reasons for it. Number 1, it helps you to change the names of your environment variables throughout your development lifecycle without having a whole bunch of rework to do. 2, it helps you to build paths and network paths, URLs and stuff like that, and pass those up as a whole piece to your main page rather than having those things be individual data items that you have to deal with each time you want to work with them. The 3rd reason is so that you can do some data validation on your environment variables right at the beginning of your process before you get too far into it, and then your process identify there's something wrong with the environment variable when it's actually time to use it. I'm going to show you really quick how that works. I'm going to step from my main page from the start. You'll notice I've added a new page reference, Get Environment Variables. I'll step into it. A couple things are going to happen on this page. The first 2 stages here combine a path that involves 3 environment variables. This path, folder, and file name combines them all together. And then the end stage is going to output that as a file path all as one item. Then I'm going to step forward here over this decision stage, and it says, it's got a validation here on one of the data items, one of the environment variables. And then it'll output that environment variable up to the main page. The main page has its own versions of these variables, but they are not environment variables. They're local or global. And that allows me to manipulate these more easily. I don't have to worry about changing the name of an environment variable all the way across my process everywhere that it's used. So that was a quick introduction to what I'm going to talk about. If you already knew all this stuff before, or you've already thought of this idea and you think it's not worth your time, totally fine. Appreciate your coming by. But if you're interested in this, and if I went way too fast for you just now, don't worry. The video goes a lot slower after this. I try to get straight to the point though. If you're still here with me and you want to learn more, feel free to continue in the video. All of what I just mentioned is what I'm going to talk about, each piece in more depth and more slowly, so that if I talked too fast or I wasn't clear for you, I breezed over the ideas, I am going to go in more depth. Let's go ahead and get into it. First, to get the process templates from Blue Prism, go to portal.blueprism.com, go to Product, and then Developer Jumpstart, and scroll down to nearly the bottom. And underneath this section here under Templates, there's Process Template 1, Process Template 2, Process Examples, and Business Object Templates. Download those, import them into your own local Blue Prism environment, and I highly suggest using those whenever you make processes and objects. It's a great way to make sure that there's a base sort of standardization, not only your organization, but also so that there's standardization across the whole Blue Prism community. So if you go from one company to another, you'll likely be able to recognize the standard format of a process or an object because we're all doing things in a similar kind of way. That's how you get these. You'll download them by clicking on the links on the side here. I'm going to close this and go into one of them. So I've imported them into my environment, and you'll see I've moved them into folders, Blue Prism process templates and Blue Prism object templates. I'm going to open the one called Process Template 1 Basic. Inside this process template, you'll see likely the same thing you're used to is a section over here where you start up and maybe you populate the queue, and then on the right side, closing down the apps that you were working with. And in the bottom and the middle here, you have your main loop that we're all used to, where you get next item, check to see if you got an item to determine whether you should continue or not, perform step 1, step 2, step 3 on that item, mark it completed, or mark it as an exception if something went wrong, reset the global data items, and then go back around, get next item, and keep going until you run out of items to work with. I think we're all used to that by now. If you're not used to that, I'd highly suggest grabbing this template. It is a fantastic way to start off from. It helps you, get a lot of the kind of mundane work out of the way by just copying this. And the way that you do that is, I'll show it here. What I'm going to do, I'll go up to File after I have this process template open, Save As, and I'm going to name it Process Template 1 Basic. We'll call it Edited for now, but you'd obviously name it whatever your process is. I'm going to save it in the default folder. Next. All right, so it'll go ahead and save that. Give it a second, and it'll come up to say the new name that you've given it. Now we're in the new process, not the template that we first downloaded. This is the process template that I'm going to work with while I show you how to work with environment variables. Now, open your main Blue Prism window, go to the System tab. In the Objects group, down at the bottom, you'll see Environment Variables. You'll also see this under the Processes group, Environment Variables. And it doesn't really matter which one you click on. If you're wondering why both of these link to the same list, I assume it's because an earlier version of Blue Prism used to separate environment variables between processes and objects. For example, how management here does actually separate processes from objects. You have to retire them in these separate windows. Over on the right, you'll see the list of environment variables. Recognize again that it'll actually say processes here or objects here, but that makes no difference which one you created in. Manipulating the environment variables in this window is actually really simple. There's only a few things you can do with them. You can add new environment variables, you can remove old environment variables, you can edit them, and you can find references to them. So starting with add variable, I'm going to click add variable. It always adds it at the very bottom. If you have a huge list of environment variables, which most environments do, they have more than one page. I'll show you what happens. I'll click add environment variable until it goes past the page that we can see, and you'll see the scroll bar will pull up on the right side. Let me type something here. All right. If I click add variable, it always adds to the bottom. So if it doesn't automatically bring your view all the way out on the bottom, you've clicked add variable, it appears as though nothing has happened. It actually has. It's down at the bottom, so scroll down to it. I'm actually going to click. While we're at it, let me show you what happens when I do this. I'm going to try to click away and go back to the System tab, click Environment Variables, and you'll see all the work that I did just went away. Until you click the button Apply down here, it won't make the save for you. I can add an environment variable, type the name, test variable, choose a data type like flag. This is a flag variable. I'll choose true for my default value, click Apply. Now if I click away and come back to this tab, you'll see that my variable is now saved. That's how you add an environment variable. Click add variable, type in your data, click apply in order to save. Now if I want to edit the variable, same thing. If I want to call it test variable 2, if I click away, come back, environment variable, right? It's not saved. So you always got to make sure you click apply. Why Blue Prism doesn't have a pop-up asking you whether or not you are sure you want to leave, since some of the things you've changed aren't going to be saved, I have no idea. The fact is that's how it is, and so we want to make sure we understand how it works. Same thing for deleting environment variables. If I click remove variable, right, it'll let me know whether or not it found any other references. I can decide I don't want to delete this. There are no references found. It's automatically selected this box on the right, and I'm going to click delete selected environment variables. And then if I click away, come back, click environment variables, the variable's now back. So in all of these actions, you'll need to make sure you click apply for that to take place. So we'll click a remove variable again, delete selected items, click apply, click away and come back, click environment variables. And now we can see that the test environment variable that we created no longer exists. The other feature that I mentioned in this environment variables view is find references. So click on an environment variable, click find references, and you'll have a list here of all of the processes and objects that reference that environment variable. If you need to view it and determine why it's being referenced, maybe you're trying to remove that environment variable, or you want to change its name or something like that, that will cause it to break wherever it's being called from, you can click view, and then it'll bring up two windows. The one on the right is either Object or Process Studio, and then on the one on the left here is the Advanced Find So I can double click on this highlighted row right here to find exactly where it's referenced. It's highlighting this stage right here, EV group num. Go into this and check out what's going on, decide whether or not I want to change the environment variable or maybe I'm trying to troubleshoot something. You could have a number of reasons why you'd use this, but that's an easy way to look up where the environment variable is being used. What are environment variables? You probably know a little bit about it, right? You probably know that environment variables are, just like the name implies, intended to be variables that change from one environment to another. That could be one Blue Prism environment to another Blue Prism environment. It could be one environment of a target application to another environment of that target application. So you might interact with the user acceptance version of an application in your user acceptance Blue Prism environment. And then when you move to the production Blue Prism environment, you might point to a different target application. So maybe that means that a URL changes, or maybe that means a network path changes. It could be the names of windows might change from a development or UA environment to a production environment. Number of reasons why it might change from one to another, but that's generally speaking the right way to use environment variables. Doesn't mean you can't use it for other purposes as well. You can use it for constants, so that you start a process and a certain value has to stay the same the entire time throughout the session. That's a fair way to use environment variables. They can also be used for configuration purposes. So if you want to turn a flag on and off to enable or disable sending emails for completion of some task, you could use environment variables for that. It's really flexible. You can use it however you want. Obviously, any way that you can imagine that works within the confines of how they function. And some of those things that I just mentioned are the ways that I use environment variables. One reason that I like using them is that they're in the Blue Prism environment. You can use config files like as text files sitting on a computer or sitting on a shared drive or whatever. But what I don't like about that is it requires a connection to whatever that is. So if a shared drive is down, or whatever, if you have like a local file on a machine, you have to make sure that the file is accurate. It has the right information for that machine, or that it's the same across multiple machines. Environment variables are the same across the entire Blue Prism environment, and so it's a reliable, if not super easy, way to manipulate configuration. Environment variables have the same data type possibilities as other data items. So it's the same as individual data items and fields in collections and stuff like that. I can click on this drop down for the type, which is referring to the data type, and I've got date, date time, flag, number, password, text, time, time span, image, binary. All of these data types work. What I'll suggest is that you're most likely going to stick to date, date time, flag, number, text, time, and time span. The others definitely work. You can use them, but there's a couple reasons why you might not use them, and I'll go ahead and point out one reason for passwords. There's already a method for maintaining credentials. It's really generally not standard or best practice to use password data types in environment variables. You'll instead go and create a credential and store your password or even sensitive information there, because there you can restrict access to it. Currently, as of Blue Prism 6.5, there is no way to restrict access to environment variables. Like, they implemented the multi-team environment, and that was fantastic. It restricts access to processes and objects and different resource machines, but it doesn't restrict access by team to specific environment variables. I suspect that will come eventually, but that's not the case now. And so because you can't do that, anybody can retrieve the password that you put into an environment variable. Hope that makes sense. There's a few other things I want to go ahead and say about environment variables. Hope I'm not boring you. I am trying to tell you the least amount of information that I think is necessary to kind of get you started. If you're new to this Blue Prism thing and you're asking like, what in the world are environment variables? A couple more things I think you should know. Whenever you create an environment variable or you edit an environment variable, delete an environment variable, any manipulation you do at all, that only affects process sessions that have not started yet. You should always plan to have environment variables contain the value you intend for them to have before the process starts. So if I have a process that starts at 8:30 in the morning and I realize, I didn't change the environment variable value, the process starts up at 8:30 and I know that it's doing a little bit of work to begin with. but I'm going to hurry up and try to change the environment variable before 8:32 when I know that it's really going to try to get that value and work with it. It's already got the value at 8:30 when the process starts. So if the process is running, let's say right now it's 8:31, I come in and I change this VBO username to Dave M, and I click apply, right? It has changed the environment variable. It is now changed in the database, but the process has already loaded everything it needs into memory. So it has the old value of Dave. So if it goes to use Dave as a username to log into an application, it's gone. So at 8:32, even though I've already changed it, it's already got that value and it's going to use it. Another important thing that I think I've mentioned a little bit, but when an environment variable is retrieved, when a process starts, that environment variable cannot change at all during that session. You can get the value out of the environment variable, put it into another data item, copy the value over there, and then you can change that data item's value. But you cannot change the original environment variable. It is essentially hard-coded and stuck that way for the whole session. The next time the session runs, it'll get the new value and stuff, but it is solid for the duration of the session. That is as opposed to the session variables or any of the other normal data items that can change during the session. All right, I have been talking enough about environment variables and kind of like cursory or other information you might need to know about them. Let's look at an example of how I'd say to implement your environment variables. And specifically what I'm talking about is how do you include them in your process, and how do you deal with using the values throughout. I'm going to go back over to my process that I have open. It's that one that we created from that template. As I mentioned, you'll notice, if you're familiar with this, you'll notice the startup page and the populate queue page. What I'm going to suggest is that you add one more page as part of your standard practices. Move your start stage up, drag a page reference on here next to the line. Let's add a new page and create a reference to it. Next, let's call this get environment variables. Finish. I'm going to make this the same size as the other page references. Hit F3. Link these together, F2, move this back. And now I've got my environment variables page, but I need to go over and deal with that. So let's go to the environment. Let's right click up here on the area with all these tabs for all the pages, click manage pages, move it, select, move it up to here. Click OK, because this is called immediately after the main page starts. Now, let's say that I might have a ton of environment variables, but I'm just going to show you a couple to kind of get you going toward what I'm talking about. Drag a data item onto the page. I always like to make them a little wider. Open this up, hit E to select environment variable. And then down in my list, I'm just going to choose one of these. Let's say the VBO username. Click OK. I'm going to copy this. This is a shortcut, I guess, if you have a ton of environment variables to work with and all the ones you're working with right now have a similar naming convention, like they're prefixed with the same thing. I can hit Control-C, Control-V, paste it in here. And then when I open this up, click on the drop. First of all, it's already selected as an environment variable, right? Hit the drop down, and now I have it selected. It's selected at the same point where I left off. So if you had like 5,000 environment variables, you wouldn't have to go scrolling through the list again. Click on group num. I have no idea what that means. Let's just pretend like we know what it is. All right, so now I've got my two environment variables. And what I'm going to do is take these environment variables, put them into local variables, or they could be global variables. But the point is, I'm going to go get the values out of the environment variables, and then I'm going to reference my local/global variables, not the environment variables, whenever I use them throughout the process. So the first thing I like to do is go into my end stage and go ahead and create outputs for these, because global variables are bad, so let's avoid that. And the goal here is that no page, besides the get environment variables page, no other page will be able to see these data items. Add twice. I'm just going to type VBO username. If you have a prefix for your environment variables, which I don't actually normally do this, but I'll have some kind of naming convention, but if you named it EV for environment variable, then you can name your environment variables like that. And then when you have your local version, you can take the EV off. and that's just a way to deconflict the names. These were they text? I think they were text. And then I'm going to get the value from these environment variables right here. And this is the standard way to do it anyways, with no validation whatsoever. And then we'll come back and I'll show you how I would actually do it with validation. Go back to your main page, open up the Get Environment Variables page, go to Outputs, click on each of these to auto-create these data items. And then normally I'd put these over to the side and organize them, but I'm going to leave them over here for now just so we can see them easier. Now when I start my process, I'm going to step over this page and boom, I've got myself some local or / global, right? I could go make them global if I needed to, but the point is that they are not environment variables. And there are a number of benefits to doing this. If I have some point during my flow, I don't know why I would use it in a get next item page or stage, but let's just say that I used these here. Here we are. Let's get the group num and put it in the key filter and the VBO username and put it in the tag filter. Okay, there's no reason for my choosing these data items. They have nothing to do with the logic. I'm just showing you an example of if you were to reference your environment variables. Click OK. All right, so now I can use this. I'm not actually going to run it because it wouldn't do anything. But if I were to come down here and run this, it's going to reference these variables right here. If I had put my environment variables onto the main page, or I made them global, right, I would have this text inside of get next item. You know, it would say something like this. And that's okay. But what I have found is it gets to be super annoying for several reasons. First reason is if I'm developing a process for a month or so, and during that month, I go through a number of iterations for redeveloping my process. I'm constantly making it better, redesigning it, and I think that's the right way to go. Get into it, and you realize there's a better way, go ahead and make it the better way. If I'm referencing this environment variable all over the place in my process, I have no choice. If I need to change the environment variable, in the environment variables view in the system tab in Blue Prism, I have to go and change it in all those places in my process. And that is just not something I like to do. I will use this version, right, without the name, without EV, the local data item, so that if I had to change the environment variable name, this is what I'd do. Let's delete these. Go to Get Environment Variables, and this is the one that needs to change, right? I'm going to go to System tab, Environment Variables. Let's change this name to something else, like username 1. Click Apply. And now, remember what I said, that this environment variable still works as long as the session hasn't ended yet. Well, the session will end effectively. It doesn't really end, but it kind of refreshes when I hit the refresh button here. And now what it says is missing this environment variable because I renamed it. I'm going to go into this and reselect the new one, click OK. I will have to change one thing here, which is the name that this output parameter is getting this data item's value from. But notice I only had to change the environment variable name. I didn't have to change this one, which means when I click OK, I'm going to reset, go to the main page. I'm going to step into the Get Environment Variable page, step out. It has now received my values, and I updated that rather quickly. I only had to change it in one place. I don't have to change just the Get Next item if I had used the environment variable reference here. But imagine if you had it in 40 different places. By using this method of abstracting or encapsulating or whatever verb you want to use, these environment variables, it's so much easier to update. All that was reason number one, was if you have to change the environment variable's name. Reason number two is that I frequently find it's necessary to take an environment variable and combine it with another one. So one thing I commonly do is I'll have one environment variable for the root area of a folder, like a process folder. It'll have a full path say like C colon Blue Prism, and then underneath that, I'll have individual folders for each process. I might have 2 different environment variables for each of those things. So let's say I have like the path and the folder. I might even have what I would expect the file name to be. So I'm going to create these. If I can click this right. I'm going to leave the descriptions blank for now, but it is best practice to fill that in so people know what this means. The path is going to be C colon Blue Prism, which I don't think it actually exists on my machine, but C colon Blue Prism, and the folder will be automation 1, and then the file I'll name file name 1.xlsx. Click apply. Now, if I were to use the other method of maintaining environment variables by just tossing them onto the main page, it's going to be a lot more painful because now I have 3 different environment variables that I need to combine together every time I need to use them. Because remember, you can't change environment variables. So let's actually bring those in. Wait, I think I need to reset. Let's reset copy, remember, so you can go straight to those environment variables. Here's the ones I created. We'll go file name, copy, paste, folder, copy, paste, and path. Now I'll add these to my output, file name, and I'll get this. So I probably should have done my naming convention of EV for environment variable, but I didn't do that here. So I'll probably just need to name it something slightly different, and I'll show you why. If I were to do this, and then I output this data item to the main page, if I ever want to make it global, which is sometimes a necessity, you can't, because this name on the main page will conflict with the name of the environment variable on this page. So that's why it's best to have a different name. But in this case, I'll just, remove the space. Let's put a prefix on it like LCL for local. I don't know. We'll go with that. LCL folder, LCL path. And we'll get this from the environment variable folder, the environment variable path, click OK, go to the main page, open up your environment variable page reference, click these buttons to auto create, and we will reorganize this a little bit. Now let's step over what just happened. Boom, look at that. Imagine if instead of this, I had copied these and put them straight onto the main page like this. Notice that I can't go into these, and I'm typing right now. Like I can't change an environment variable. If you try to set the value or change it in any way, let's see, what's that called? File name. If I were to try to put some data into file name, set next stage, it'll give me an error saying could not store calculation result, cannot set the value on an environment variable. Just not a thing. So because of that, I can't change one of these or manipulate anyway. Every time I want to use it, I'm going to have to build it and put them together. Or I'll need to build it on this page right here. What I prefer to do is on the get environment variables page, instead of outputting these, right, I'll remove these and I'll put, file path. And I won't get the value from this. I'll get the value from, let's see, combined file path. All right, I'll use something like this. Go to file management, combine path. This way, combine path is fantastic, so that I know it's super easy, but I don't have to deal with the backslashes and stuff. So in this case, I'm gonna say that the folder is the path, and the file name is actually folder, because that makes sense. So what I want to do is I want to combine the path which is C:\Blue Prism, with the folder, which I called automation or something. The output is going to be, I'm going to just put it into combined file path. I'll show you what happens when I do this. Right, let's set next stage here. All right, so what we got out of it is this value. So it combined this part with this part, putting the backslash if it needs to be there. Or if it doesn't already exist in one of them, then it'll add it. I'm going to copy this stage. Use combined path still. The difference is that I'm going to use combined file path for the folder and put file name into this. The output will still be combined file path. Click OK, connect to them in, set on the start stage. Okay, so we get our basic path. And then if I step one more time, it adds the file name to it. Now we've got our full path. That's what I'm going to output right here. So let's reset and we'll start from the main page again. Step in, go over this, get our file path, step, and now we have, I don't think we mapped that yet. Let's map our output to file path. Okay, right here. Step again, we'll step over this time. And now we've got our file path. So this I can reference wherever I want throughout the process. I can even change it if necessary. And you may want to output the path or the folder or the file name out of the page too. But what this allows you to do is deal with that local or global variable or whatever. But it's already built for you. So you don't have to combine those individual things together every time. I could have built that outside of the environment variables page, but I find that it works really well. This brings me to my third reason why you should use the Get Environment Variables page. It is so that you can perform data validation on your environment variables. I know, everybody is perfect, and the production support or whoever maintains the environment variables always put the right value in, right? I mean, people don't make mistakes like typos because, wait, actually, I think that's why RPA exists, because we can't stop making typos. So what I can do is, I'm just going to do one example of some kind of data validation. Let's say that, here, let me step into this page. Let's say that I think there should not be any spaces in the username. I'll put this. Okay, let's see. In string greater than 0. So what this is saying is, in this string, in this text, whatever's here, I want to get the number, the position number of the space. I need to put a space. The position number of the space, and if that position number is greater than 0, I know there's a space in here, and that's a bad thing. So contains a space. And then I would probably throw an error right here. So like, exception. So does it contain a space? Yes. Well, then throw an error. And what that would mean is that the process would terminate early by going up to the main page, bubbling up and causing a termination if it's not handled. So we cause the termination on purpose. Maybe it sends an email or whatever. But the point is here that you find out early on whether there's something wrong with your environment variable. Because I'm telling you, if you don't do this right up front here, you may not know until the end of the process when the environment variable is trying to, or when the process is trying to do something important and it can't. And it needs to because it's already performed some other actions and now it needs to do something else. So it's a good idea to do your data validation on your environment variables right at this stage. Let's run this and we'll step in, step here, contains a space. Oh no, my username contains a space. Okay, so it'll throw an error. It'll go up to the main page, not get caught. I don't have any exception data. It'll terminate the session. Maybe it sends an email and stuff. And then I receive that email. I go, oh no, I need to go fix that. I go to the environment variables page here. I change this to not have a space. Remember, I click apply. And then always, as a best practice, click away from this tab, click back to the tab, environment variables, make sure that the variable has in fact changed, then go back in. You won't be in debug mode, but you'll be running control room. You'll start your process again. You'll start your schedule again, whatever. And then it will go through, and this time my username is valid because it doesn't contain any spaces. To sum up, I think that it is a fantastic idea to use a get environment variables page in every process as part of your standardized template. I encourage you to add this. I have used this for quite a while, and I think it's a good addition. I usually try to only suggest ideas. I have tried out a fair amount myself, and at this point, I'm pretty convinced that this is a good idea. I encourage you to use it, and thanks so much for watching. See you next time.